Captain James Cook FRSRN was a British explorer, navigator, cartographer, and captain in the Royal Navy. Cook made detailed maps of Newfoundland prior to making 3 voyages to the Pacific Ocean, during which he achieved the first recorded European contact with the eastern coastline of Australia and the Hawaiian Islands, and the first recorded circumnavigation of New Zealand. Cook joined the British Merchant Navy as a teenager and joined the Royal Navy in 1755. He saw action in the 7 Years' War, and subsequently surveyed and mapped much of the entrance to the St. Lawrence River during the Siege of Quebec. This helped bring Cook to the attention of the Admiralty and Royal Society. This notice came at a crucial moment in both Cook's career in the direction of British overseas exploration, and led to his commission in 1766 as commander of HM Endeavour for the first of 3 Pacific voyages. In 3 voyages, Cook sailed thousands of miles across largely uncharted areas of the globe. He mapped lands from New Zealand to Hawaii in the Pacific Ocean in greater detail and on a scale not previously achieved. As he progressed on his voyages of discovery, he surveyed and named features, and recorded islands and coastlines on European maps for the first time. He displayed a combination of seamanship, superior surveying and cartographic skills, physical courage and an ability to lead men in adverse conditions. Cook was attacked and killed in a confrontation with Hawaiians during his 3rd exploratory voyage in the Pacific in 1779. He left a legacy of scientific and geographical knowledge which was to influence his successes well into the 20th century, and numerous memorials worldwide have been dedicated to him. Early life and family. James Cook was born on the 27th of October 1728 in the village of Marton in Yorkshire and baptised on the 3rd of November in the parish church of St Cuthbert, where his name can be seen in the church register. He was the second of 8 children of James Cook, a Scottish farm labourer from Ednam in Roxburghshire, and his locally born wife, Grace Pace, from Thornaby-on-Tees. In 1736, his family moved to Wherry Home Farm at Great Ayton, where his father's employer, Thomas Scott, paid for him to attend the local school. In 1741, after 5 years' schooling, he began work for his father, who had by now been promoted to farm manager. For leisure, he would climb a nearby hill, Roseberry topping, enjoying the opportunity for solitude. Cook's cottage, his parents' last home, which he is likely to have visited, is now in Melbourne, having been moved from England and reassembled, brick by brick, in 1934. In 1745, when he was 16, Cook moved 20 miles to the fishing village of Staithes, to be apprenticed as a shopboy to grocer and haberdasher William Sanderson. Historians have speculated that this is where Cook first felt the lure of the sea while gazing out of the shop window. After 18 months, not proving suitable for shop work, Cook travelled to the nearby port town of Whitby to be introduced to friends of Sanderson's, John and Henry Walker. The Walkers, who were Quakers, were prominent local ship owners in the coal trade. The house is now the Captain Cook Memorial Museum. Cook was taken on as a merchant navy apprentice in the small fleet of vessels plying coal along the English coast. His first assignment was aboard the collier Free Love, and he spent several years on this and various other coasters, sailing between the Tyne and London. As part of his apprenticeship, Cook applied himself to the study of algebra, geometry, trigonometry, navigation and astronomy, all skills he would need one day to command his own ship. His 3-year apprenticeship completed, Cook began working on trading ships in the Baltic Sea. After passing his examinations in 1752, he soon progressed through the merchant navy ranks, starting with his promotion in that year to mate aboard the collier brig Friendship. In 1755, within a month of being offered command of this vessel, he volunteered for service in the Royal Navy, when Britain was rearming for what was to become the 7 Years' War. Despite the need to start back at the bottom of the naval hierarchy, Cook realized his career would advance more quickly in military service and entered the Navy at Wapping on 17 June 1755. Cook married Elizabeth Batts, the daughter of Samuel Batts, keeper of the Bell in Wapping and one of his mentors. On 21 December 1762 at St Margaret's Church in Barking, Essex. The couple had 6 children: James, Nathaniel, Elizabeth, Joseph, George and Hugh, the last of whom died of scarlet fever while a student at Christ's College, Cambridge. When not at sea, Cook lived in the East End of London. He attended St Paul's Church, Shadwell, where his son James was baptized. Cook has no known direct descendants. All his recorded children either predeceased him or died without issue. Start of Royal Navy career. Cook's first posting was with HMS Eagle, serving as able seaman and master's mate under Captain Joseph Hamer for his first year aboard, and Captain Hugh Palliser thereafter. In October and November 1755 he took part in Eagle's capture of one French warship and the sinking of another, following which he was promoted to boatswain in addition to his other duties. His first temporary command was in March 1756 when he was briefly master of the Cruiser, a small cutter attached to the Eagle while on patrol. In June 1757 Cook passed his master's examinations at Trinity House, Deptford, which qualified him to navigate and handle a ship of the King's fleet. He then joined the frigate HMS Solebay as master under Captain Robert Cray. Conquest of Canada. During the 7 Years' War, Cook served in North America as master of Pembroke. In 1758 he took part in the major amphibious assault that captured the fortress of Louisbourg from the French, after which he participated in the siege of Quebec City and then the Battle of the Plains of Abraham in 1759. He showed a talent for surveying and cartography, and was responsible for mapping much of the entrance to the St. Lawrence River during the siege, thus allowing General Wolfe to make his famous stealth attack on the Plains of Abraham. Cook's surveying ability was put to good use mapping the jagged coast of Newfoundland in the 1760s, aboard HMS Grenville. He surveyed the northwest stretch in 1763 and 1764, the south coast between the Buran Peninsula and Cape Ray in 1765 and 1766, and the west coast in 1767. At this time Cook employed local pilots to point out the rocks and hidden dangers along the south and west coasts. During the 1765 season, 4 pilots were engaged at a daily pay of 4 shillings each. John Beck for the coast west of Great St. Lawrence, Morgan's Nook for Fortune Bay, John Dawson for Conagra and Hermitage Bay, and John Peck for the Bay of Despair. His 5 seasons in Newfoundland produced the first large-scale and accurate maps of the island's coasts and were the first scientific, large-scale, hydrographic surveys to use precise triangulation to establish land outlines. They also gave Cook his mastery of practical surveying, achieved under often adverse conditions, and brought him to the attention of the Admiralty and Royal Society at a crucial moment both in his career and in the direction of British overseas discovery. Cook's map would be used into the 20th century, copies of it being referenced by those sailing Newfoundland's waters for 200 years. Following on from his exertions in Newfoundland, it was at this time that Cook wrote that he intended to go not only farther than any man has been before me, but as far as I think it is possible for a man to go. Voyages of exploration. First voyage in 1766, Admiralty engaged Cook to command a scientific voyage to the Pacific Ocean. The purpose of the voyage was to observe and record the transit of Venus across the Sun for the benefit of Royal Society inquiry into a means of determining longitude. Cook, at the age of 39, was promoted to lieutenant to grant him sufficient status to take the command. For its part, the Royal Society agreed that Cook would receive a 100-guinea gratuity in addition to his naval pay. The expedition sailed from England on the 26th of August 1768, rounded Cape Horn and continued westward across the Pacific to arrive at Tahiti on the 13th of April 1769, where the observations of the Venus transit were made. However, the result of the observations was not as conclusive or accurate as had been hoped. Once the observations were completed, Cook opened the sealed orders, which were additional instructions from the Admiralty for the second part of his voyage, to search the South Pacific for signs of the postulated rich southern continent of Terra Australis. Cook then sailed to New Zealand and mapped the complete coastline, making only some minor errors. He then voyaged west, reaching the southeastern coast of Australia on the 19th of April 1770, and in doing so his expedition became the first recorded Europeans to have encountered its eastern coastline. On the 23rd of April he made his first recorded direct observation of indigenous Australians at Brush Island near Borley Point, noting in his journal, "and were so near the shore as to distinguish several people upon the sea which they appeared to be of a very dark black colour, but whether this was the real colour of the skins of the cloths they might have on I know not." On the 29th of April Cook and crew made the first landfall on the mainland of the continent at a place now known as the Colonel Peninsula. Cook originally christened the area as Stingray Bay, but he later crossed it out and named it Botany Bay after the unique specimens retrieved by the botanists Joseph Banks and Daniel Smalander. It is here that James Cook made first contact with an aboriginal tribe known as the Gwigal. After his departure from Botany Bay he continued northwards. On the 11th of June a mishap occurred when HMS Endeavour ran aground on a shoal of the Great Barrier Reef, and then nursed into a river mouth on the 18th of June 1770. The ship was badly damaged and his voyage was delayed almost 7 weeks while repairs were carried out on the beach. The voyage then continued, sailing through Torres Strait, and on the 22nd of August Cook landed on Possession Island, where he claimed the entire coastline that he had just explored as British territory. He returned to England via Batavia at the Cape of Good Hope, and arriving on the island of St Helena on the 12th of July 1771. Interlude Cook's journals were published upon his return, and he became something of a hero among the scientific community. Among the general public, however, the aristocratic botanist Joseph Banks was a greater hero. Banks even attempted to take command of Cook's second voyage, but removed himself from the voyage before it began, and Johann Reinhold Forster and his son Georg Forster were taken on as scientists for the voyage. Cook's son George was born 5 days before he left for his second voyage. Shortly after his return from the first voyage, Cook was promoted in August 1771 to the rank of commander. In 1772 he was commissioned to lead another scientific expedition on behalf of the Royal Society, to search for the hypothetical Terra Australis. On his first voyage, Cook had demonstrated by circumnavigating New Zealand that it was not attached to a larger land mass to the south. Although he charted almost the entire eastern coastline of Australia, showing it to be continental in size, the Terra Australis was believed to lie further south. Despite this evidence to the contrary, Alexander Dalrymple and others of the Royal Society still believed that a massive southern continent continent should exist. Cook commanded HMS Resolution on this voyage, while Tobias Furneaux commanded its companion ship, HMS Adventure. Cook's expedition circumnavigated the globe at an extreme southern latitude, becoming one of the first to cross the Antarctic Circle. In the Antarctic fog, Resolution and Adventure became separated. Furneaux made his way to New Zealand, where he lost some of his men during an encounter with Maori, and eventually sailed back to Britain, while Cook continued to explore the Antarctic, reaching 71 degrees 10 S on the 31st of January 1774. Cook almost encountered the mainland of Antarctica, but turned towards Tahiti to resupply his ship. He then resumed his southward course in a second fruitless attempt to find the supposed continent. On this leg of the voyage he brought a young Tahitian named Omai, who proved to be somewhat less knowledgeable about the Pacific than Tupia had been on the first voyage. On his return voyage to New Zealand in 1774, Cook landed at the Friendly Islands, Easter Island, Norfolk Island, New Caledonia, and Vanuatu. Before returning to England, Cook made a final sweep across the South Atlantic from Cape Horn and surveyed, mapped and took possession for Britain of South Georgia, which had been explored by Anthony de la Roche in 1675. Cook also discovered and named Clark Rocks and the South Sandwich Islands. He then turned north to South Africa, and from there continued back to England. His reports upon his return home put to rest the popular myth of Terror Australis. Cook's second voyage marked his successful employment of Larkham Kendall's K1 copy of John Harrison's H4 marine chronometer, which enabled Cook to calculate his longitudinal position with much greater accuracy. Cook's log was full of praise for this timepiece, which he used to make charts of the southern Pacific Ocean that were so remarkably accurate that copies of them were still in use in the mid-20th century. Upon his return, Cook was promoted to the rank of post captain and given an honorary retirement from the Royal Navy, with a posting as an officer of the Greenwich Hospital. He reluctantly accepted, insisting that he be allowed to quit the post if an opportunity for active duty should arise. His fame now extended beyond the Admiralty. He was made a Fellow of the Royal Society, and awarded the Copley Gold Medal for completing his second voyage without losing a amount of scurvy. Nathaniel Dance-Holland painted his portrait. He dined with James Boswell. He was described in the House of Lords as the first navigator in Europe, but he could not be kept away from the sea. A third voyage was planned, and Cook volunteered to find the Northwest Passage. He traveled to the Pacific and hoped to travel east to the Atlantic, while a simultaneous voyage traveled the opposite route. Third voyage. On his last voyage, Cook again commanded HMS Resolution, while Captain Charles Clark commanded HMS Discovery. The voyage was ostensibly planned to return the Pacific Islander Omai to Tahiti, or so the public were led to believe. The trip's principal goal was to locate a Northwest Passage around the American continent. After dropping Omai at Tahiti, Cook traveled north and in 1778 became the first European to begin formal contact with the Hawaiian Islands. After his initial landfall in January 1778 at Waimea Harbor, Kauai, Cook named the archipelago the Sandwich Islands after the 4th Earl of Sandwich, the acting First Lord of the Admiralty. For the Sandwich Islands, Cook sailed north and then northeast to explore the west coast of North America north of the Spanish settlements in Alta, California. He made landfall on the Oregon coast at approximately 44 degrees 30 north latitude, naming his landing point Cape Foul Weather. Bad weather forced his ships south to about 43 degrees north before they could begin their exploration of the coast northward. He unknowingly sailed past the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and soon after entered Nootka Sound on Vancouver Island. He anchored near the First Nations village of Yuko. Cook's two ships remained in Nootka Sound from the 29th of March to the 26th of April 1778, in what Cook called Ship Cove, now Resolution Cove, at the south end of Bligh Island, about 5 miles east across Nootka Sound from Yuko, lay a New Charnold village. Relations between Cook's crew and the people of Yuko were cordial if sometimes strained. In trading, the people of Yuko demanded much more valuable items than the usual trinkets that had worked in Hawaii. Metal objects were much desired, but the lead, pewter, and tin traded at first soon fell into disrepute. The most valuable items which the British received in trade were sea otter pelts. During the stay, the Yuko hosts essentially controlled the trade with the British vessels. The natives usually visited the British vessels at Resolution Cove, instead of the British visiting the village of Yuko at Friendly Cove. After leaving Nootka Sound, Cook explored and mapped the coast all the way to the Bering Strait, on the way identifying what came to be known as Cook Inlet in Alaska. In a single visit, Cook charted the majority of the North American northwest coastline on world maps for the first time, determined the extent of Alaska, and closed the gaps in Russian and Spanish exploratory probes of the northern limits of the Pacific. By the second week of August 1778, Cook was through the Bering Strait, sailing into the Chukchi Sea. He headed northeast up the coast of Alaska until he was blocked by sea ice. His furthest north was 70 degrees 44 minutes. Cook then sailed west to the Siberian coast, and then southeast down the Siberian coast back to the Bering Strait. By early September 1778 he was back in the Bering Sea to begin the trip to the Sandwich Islands. He became increasingly frustrated on this voyage, and perhaps began to suffer from a stomach ailment. It has been speculated that this led to a irrational behavior towards his crew, such as forcing them to eat walrus meat, which they had pronounced inedible. Return to Hawaii. Cook returned to Hawaii in 1779. After sailing around the archipelago for some 8 weeks, he made landfall at Kealakekua Bay, on Hawaii Island, largest island in the Hawaiian archipelago. Cook's arrival coincided with the Makahiki, a Hawaiian harvest festival of worship for the Polynesian god Lono. Coincidentally, the form of Cook's ship HMS Resolution, or more particularly the mast formation, sails and rigging, resembled certain significant artifacts that formed part of the season of worship. Similarly, Cook's clockwise route around the island of Hawaii before making landfall resembled the processions that took place in a clockwise direction around the island during the Lono festivals. It has been argued that such coincidences were the reasons for Cook's initial deification by some Hawaiians who treated Cook as an incarnation of Lono. Though this view was first suggested by members of Cook's expedition, the idea that any Hawaiians understood Cook to be Lono, and the evidence presented in support of it, were challenged in 1992. Death. After a month's stay, Cook attempted to resume his exploration of the northern Pacific. Shortly after leaving Hawaii Island, however, the Resolution's foremast broke, so the ships returned to Kealakekua Bay for repairs. Tensions rose, and a number of quarrels broke out between the Europeans and Hawaiians at Kealakekua Bay. An unknown group of Hawaiians took one of Cook's small boats. The evening when the cutter was taken, the people had become insolent, even with threats to fire upon them. Cook was forced into a wild goose chase that ended with his return to the ship frustrated. He attempted to kidnap and ransom the king of Hawaii, Kalani. The following day, the 14th of February 1779, Cook marched through the village to retrieve the king. Cook took the king by his own hand and led him willingly away. One of Kalani's favourite wives, Kanekarpoli and two chiefs approached the group as they were heading to boats. They pleaded with the king not to go until he stopped and sat where he stood. An old kahuna, chanting rapidly while holding out a coconut, attempted to distract Cook and his men as a large crowd began to form at the shore. The king began to understand that Cook was his enemy. As Cook turned his back to help launch the boats, he was struck on the head by the villagers and then stabbed to death as he fell on his face in the surf. He was first struck on the head with a club by a chief named Kalamano Kahoawahara and then stabbed by one of the king's attendants. NUAA. The Hawaiians carried his body away towards the back of the town, still visible to the ship through the spyglass. 4 Marines, Corporal James Thomas, Private Theophilus Hinks, Private Thomas Fatchett and Private John Allen, were also killed and 2 others were wounded in the confrontation. Aftermath. The esteem which the islanders nevertheless held for Cook caused them to retain his body. Following the practice of the time, they prepared his body with funerary rituals usually reserved for the chiefs and highest elders of the society. The body was disemboweled, baked to facilitate removal of the flesh, and the bones were carefully cleaned for preservation as religious icons in a fashion somewhat reminiscent of the treatment of European saints in the Middle Ages. Some of Cook's remains, thus preserved, were eventually returned to his crew for a formal burial at sea. Clark assumed leadership of the expedition and made a final attempt to pass through the Bering Strait. He died from tuberculosis on the 22nd of August 1779, and John Gore, a veteran of Cook's first voyage, took command of Resolution under the expedition. James King replaced Gore in command of Discovery. The expedition now returned home, reaching England in October 1780. After their arrival in England, King completed Cook's account of the voyage. David Samwell, who sailed with Cook on Resolution, wrote of him, "He was a modest man, and rather bashful, of an agreeable lively conversation, sensible and intelligent. In temper he was somewhat hasty, but of a disposition the most friendly, benevolent and humane. His person was above 6 feet high, and, though a good-looking man, he was plain both in dress and appearance. His face was full of expression, his nose extremely well-shaped, his eyes, which were small and of a brown cast, were quick and piercing, his eyebrows prominent, which gave his countenance altogether an air of austerity.